The autumn light filtering through the Providence Municipal Courthouse windows carried that particular golden quality of late October, the kind that makes everything feel more precious, more fleeting. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when routine traffic violations and minor infractions moved through the docket with practiced efficiency. At 2:45 p.m., the courtroom doors opened slowly, and the atmosphere changed immediately. Margaret O'Connor, Maggie to everyone who knew her, moved through the doorway with the careful deliberation that comes with 92 years of life. Her walker, decorated with small photographs attached with tape, clicked softly against the courthouse floor. She wore a dress from another era, carefully maintained. The kind of outfit that spoke of a generation that still dressed for important occasions with dignity and purpose. Her white hair was perfectly styled. Despite obvious frailty, she carried herself with grace, the bearing of someone who had lived through nearly a century of American history and had no intention of surrendering her dignity now. But what struck everyone most powerfully wasn't Maggie's age or her dignified bearing. It was her eyes. They held a mixture of determination, profound sadness, and something that looked like a mission she had to complete, no matter the cost. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his paperwork as Maggie approached the defendant's stand. In his 35 years on the bench, he had developed an instinct for cases that were more than they appeared. This was one of them. Margaret O'Connor, the court clerk announced gently, reading from the docket. Maggie stopped at the defendant's stand, carefully positioning her walker. When she spoke, her voice carried the tremor of age, but also unmistakable strength. Yes, Your Honor, Margaret Eleanor O'Connor. I'm 92 years old and I'm here about my parking ticket. Judge Caprio set down his papers, his characteristic gesture when someone had something important to say. Mrs. O'Connor, he began with genuine concern. You're charged with parking in a hospital loading zone for 3 hours. The fine is $45. But before we discuss that, I need to ask, are you all right? Do you need to sit down? We can bring you a chair. Maggie shook her head with gentle determination. Thank you, Your Honor. But I'm fine standing with my walker. I need to tell you something, and I want to do it properly. Standing up, like people should when they're addressing a judge. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. Mrs. O'Connor, please tell me what happened. Why were you parked in the hospital loading zone for 3 hours? Maggie took a deep breath, her weathered hands gripping the walker for support. Your Honor, I was parked in that loading zone because I was visiting my husband, Thomas. We've been married for 71 years. She paused, steadying herself. He's in the hospital and he's dying. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the court, reporters' fingers stilled on the keyboard. Your Honor, Thomas was diagnosed with end-stage heart failure 6 months ago. The doctors say he has days left. Maybe a week. I've been going to the hospital every single day, spending as much time with him as I can before... Her voice broke. Before he's gone, Judge Caprio's eyes began to glisten. Mrs. O'Connor, why did you park in the loading zone instead of the regular parking area? Maggie's voice became more tremulous. Your Honor, I'm 92 years old. I can't walk very far anymore. The regular parking is so far from the cardiac unit where Thomas is. By the time I walk from the parking garage, I'm exhausted, and I have less time to spend with him. She gathered herself to continue, and what she said next would break every heart in the room. Your Honor, Thomas and I have been together since 1954. We met at a church social when I was 21 and he was 23. We got married 6 months later, and we've never spent a night apart except when he served in Korea and when I had our babies. Tears began streaming down Maggie's weathered face. Your Honor, every minute I have with Thomas is precious. When I park in that loading zone, even though I know it's against the rules, it saves me 15 minutes of walking. 15 more minutes to hold his hand, to tell him I love him, to make sure he's not alone. Judge Caprio had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. The weight of 71 years of marriage compressed into these final days, these final minutes stolen from parking regulations, was almost unbearable. "Mrs. O'Connor," he asked softly, "does your husband know you're here today?" Maggie shook her head, crying openly. "No, Your Honor. I didn't tell him about the parking ticket because I didn't want him to worry about me. He's always taken care of me for 71 years. Even now, even dying, he asks if I'm okay, if I need anything. I couldn't tell him I got in trouble trying to spend more time with him." "Mrs. O'Connor, why didn't you just pay the $45 fine and continue parking there?" Maggie's hands trembled on her walker. "Your Honor, I was afraid that if I just paid the fine, I'd get more tickets and eventually they'd tow my car or ban me from the hospital. I came here to explain to you in person why I did it." Her voice cracked completely. "I came to ask if there's any way I can keep parking there for the few days Thomas has left." The emotional weight of this request, a 92-year-old woman asking a judge's permission to break parking rules so she could spend her dying husband's final days holding his hand, broke everyone in the courtroom. "Your Honor," Maggie continued, her voice barely a whisper now, "I know rules are rules. I know parking zones exist for reasons. But Thomas is leaving me after 71 years and I just want every minute I can have with him before he's gone forever." What Judge Caprio did next, he had never done in 35 years on the bench. He stood up from his seat and made an announcement that shocked everyone present. "Bailiff, please adjourn court for 15 minutes. Everyone take a break." He looked directly at Maggie. "Mrs. O'Connor, please don't move. I need to make a phone call." Judge Caprio disappeared into his chambers. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Maggie stood at her walker, confused but hopeful, while everyone waited. When Judge Caprio returned 15 minutes later, his eyes were red. He had clearly been crying. But there was also something else in his expression, determination mixed with joy. "Mrs. O'Connor," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I just spoke with the administrator of Rhode Island Hospital. I've explained your situation, and they're going to do something for you and Thomas." Maggie looked up, afraid to hope. "Mrs. O'Connor, Rhode Island Hospital is issuing you a special parking pass that allows you to park in any space you need, as close as possible to the cardiac unit, for as long as Thomas is there. No tickets, no time limits, no restrictions." Maggie's hands flew to her mouth in shock and gratitude. "Furthermore, Mrs. O'Connor, the hospital has assigned a volunteer to meet you when you arrive each day and escort you directly to Thomas's room, so you don't have to walk those long corridors alone." But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. "Mrs. O'Connor, not only am I dismissing your parking ticket completely, but this court is establishing a special fund in yours and Thomas's name. Any elderly person who receives a parking ticket while visiting a dying spouse at any Rhode Island hospital can have it dismissed and receive the same parking accommodation you're getting." The courtroom erupted in applause and tears as everyone realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A judge using his authority, not just to dispense justice, but to honor love that had lasted 7 decades. Maggie was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Your Honor, you would do all that for me?" Judge Caprio walked around his bench and approached Maggie, kneeling to her level. "Mrs. O'Connor, you and Thomas have been married for 71 years. You've built a life together that most people can only dream of. The least this city can do is make sure you can spend his final days holding his hand without worrying about parking tickets." Judge Caprio stood and addressed the entire courtroom, his voice carrying to every corner. "Mrs. O'Connor, I have one more question for you. In 71 years of marriage, what's the secret? What makes love last that long?" Maggie's face transformed despite her tears. What she said next would become the most quoted moment from the entire proceeding. "Your Honor, people always ask me that. They want to know the secret to 71 years. But there's no secret. There's just a choice." She paused, letting the words settle. "Every morning for 71 years, I woke up and chose Thomas. Every night, he chose me back. On the easy days, when everything was perfect, we chose each other. On the hard days, when money was tight or kids were sick or we disagreed about things, we still chose each other." The courtroom was absolutely silent as Maggie continued, her voice gaining strength from 7 decades of love. "Your Honor, in 1954, when we got married, people told us we were too young. In 1965, when Thomas lost his job, people said we'd never make it. In 1982, when our youngest son died in a car accident, people wondered how our marriage would survive that grief. But we survived everything because we never stopped choosing each other." Maggie looked directly at the young couples in the courtroom gallery. "Marriage isn't about finding someone you can live with. It's about finding someone you can't imagine living without. Thomas and I, we built a life where neither of us wanted to face a single day without the other. And now that he's leaving, I understand why we held on so tight for 71 years. Because we knew, somehow we knew, that even 7 decades wouldn't be enough time together." Judge Caprio had to wipe tears from his eyes before he could speak. "Mrs. O'Connor, what you've just described isn't just a marriage. It's a masterclass in love that everyone in this courtroom needed to hear." As court officers prepared to help Maggie toward the exit, something remarkable happened. Every person in the courtroom, lawyers, defendants, court staff, visitors, stood up spontaneously and applauded. Not the polite applause of courtesy, but the kind of standing ovation reserved for heroes. Maggie stopped, confused by the attention, and turned back to Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, why are they clapping? I just got a parking ticket dismissed." Judge Caprio's voice carried to every corner of the room. "Mrs. O'Connor, they're not applauding a parking ticket dismissal. They're honoring 71 years of choosing love and a woman who risked embarrassment in a courtroom because 15 more minutes with her husband was worth any price." By the time Maggie arrived back at Rhode Island Hospital, driven by a court officer who insisted on personally escorting her, the hospital staff had already heard about Judge Caprio's call. The parking administrator, Patricia Chen, met Maggie at the entrance holding a special laminated parking pass. "Mrs. O'Connor," Patricia said, tears in her eyes, "I just got off the phone with Judge Caprio. I want you to know that what you did today, coming to court to fight for time with your husband, that changed our entire hospital policy. We're implementing the O'Connor Compassionate Parking Program immediately." Maggie looked at the parking pass in her hands, a simple laminated card that read, "O'Connor Compassionate Pass, Unlimited Access," and began crying again. "I just wanted more time with Thomas. I never meant to change anything." Patricia took Maggie's hands gently. "Mrs. O'Connor, sometimes the most powerful changes come from the simplest acts of love. You taught us that hospital regulations should never come between spouses who are facing goodbye." As Patricia escorted Maggie to the cardiac unit, they passed dozens of hospital staff members who had already heard about the courtroom video. Nurses smiled. Doctors nodded respectfully. One elderly volunteer who had been married for 53 years stopped Maggie in the hallway. "Mrs. O'Connor, I just watched your court appearance on my phone. My husband had a heart attack last year and I spent 3 months parking illegally because I couldn't walk from the garage to his room. I got 4 tickets and paid everyone because I was too scared to fight them. Thank you for being braver than I was." When Maggie finally reached Thomas's room, he was awake and waiting. His nurse had told him that Maggie would be later than usual because she had something important to do. But Thomas didn't know about the court appearance. "Maggie," Thomas said weakly as she entered, Where were you? I was worried. Maggie took his hand, the same hand she'd been holding for 71 years, and smiled through her tears. I was taking care of something, Thomas. Making sure I can park closer to you for as long as we have. Thomas squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. Maggie, you've been taking care of me for 71 years. You've earned the right to park anywhere you want. What Thomas didn't know, what Maggie decided not to tell him until later, was that his wife had just stood in a courtroom and fought for their love in front of strangers, defended their right to every possible minute together, and in doing so had created a legacy that would help hundreds of couples facing the same heartbreak. The video went viral within hours, accumulating over 3 million views in the first 24 hours. But it wasn't just the view count that mattered. It was who was watching and what they did about it. Within hours, hospitals in 12 states contacted Rhode Island Hospital, asking about implementing similar parking policies for elderly spouses. Within a week, the O'Connor Compassionate Parking Program was adopted by over 50 hospitals nationwide. Within a month, 2 state legislatures had passed laws requiring all hospitals receiving state funding to provide compassionate parking accommodations for spouses of terminally ill patients. But perhaps most importantly, the video reached Thomas O'Connor's hospital room. His nurse showed him the video on her tablet, and Thomas, despite his weakened condition, cried as he watched his wife of 71 years defend their love in a courtroom. 3 days later, Judge Caprio visited Rhode Island Hospital to meet Thomas. Maggie was holding Thomas's hand when the judge arrived. "Mr. O'Connor," Judge Caprio said quietly, "your wife came to court to ask permission to spend more time with you. She risked embarrassment and admitted to breaking rules, because 71 years with you still isn't enough. You're a lucky man." Thomas, barely able to speak, squeezed his wife's hand and whispered, "I've been lucky for 71 years. Judge, every day with Maggie was a gift." Thomas O'Connor passed away peacefully 5 days later, with Maggie holding his hand. His last words were, "71 years wasn't enough, but it was beautiful." At Thomas's funeral, Judge Caprio delivered a eulogy about the power of lifelong love and the importance of making sure that love is never interrupted by bureaucracy or regulations that don't account for the human heart. Thomas and Maggie O'Connor showed us what it means to choose someone every day for 71 years, Judge Caprio said. Maggie's willingness to face a judge, to admit to breaking rules, to risk everything for 15 more minutes with Thomas, that's what love looks like when it's been tested by 7 decades and proven true. The O'Connor Legacy Fund, established after the courtroom video went viral, has since helped over 300 elderly couples spend their final days together without worrying about parking tickets, hospital regulations, or financial barriers to final moments. The impact extended far beyond parking policies. The story sparked conversations about how institutions treat elderly couples facing end-of-life care. It prompted hospitals to review their policies through the lens of compassion rather than just efficiency. It reminded administrators, judges, and policymakers that sometimes the most important thing a system can do is get out of the way of love. Margaret O'Connor taught us that being 92 years old doesn't mean accepting separation from the person you've chosen for 71 years. She taught us that some rules are less important than love. And she taught us that true devotion means risking everything, even a parking ticket, for 15 more minutes, holding the hand of the person who made your life beautiful. Judge Caprio proved that justice isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about understanding when humanity demands that we bend them. He showed that a judge's most powerful tool isn't the gavel, but compassion. And he demonstrated that sometimes the most important verdict a court can deliver is one that honors love over law. In the end, Maggie's story wasn't about a parking ticket. It was about the fierce determination of a 92-year-old woman who refused to let bureaucracy steal even 15 minutes from the final days of a 71-year love story. It was about a judge who understood that some violations are acts of love, not defiance. And it was about a couple who proved that true love doesn't fade with time. It deepens, it strengthens, and it becomes so powerful that even death cannot diminish it. As Maggie herself said in that courtroom, "There's no secret, there's just a choice. Every morning for 71 years I woke up and chose Thomas. Every night he chose me back." That choice, repeated daily for 7 decades, created something so beautiful that when it was threatened by a $45 parking ticket, an entire system bent to protect it, because some loves are simply too precious to interrupt.